They insisted I come. Said the holiday wouldn't feel complete without me. Fly out, Grandma, they urged, voices chipper over the phone. Thanksgiving won't be the same unless you're here. So I did what they asked. I packed my old ceramic pie dish, the one with the faded blue edge. I packed the cardigan that still smelled faintly of lavender, the one I wore when holding my grandson for the first time. I packed every bit of softness I had left to give. Then I waited. I stood beneath the glowing arrival board at Gate 6C of Fairhaven Regional, suitcase beside me, coat draped over my arm. The terminal buzzed with life. People hurried past with flowers and foil balloons. Children waved signs with crayon-scrawled names. Laughter echoed. Tears fell. Every person around me was being claimed. I stood still, like a forgotten envelope on a crowded doorstep. The flight had landed 49 minutes earlier. I had checked more than once. I had reread the message from my daughter-in-law, Alina, 3 separate times, letting each word sink deeper into my chest. We'll be there. Kids can't wait to see you. A cheerful heart emoji followed. I had responded promptly, landing at 2:50. So excited to hug everyone. There was no reply. I stayed standing. The warmth inside the airport meant I didn't need the coat, and sitting down felt dangerous, like surrendering to the idea that maybe no one was coming. Sitting would have made me look like a woman left behind. Then a buzz in my pocket. Not a call, not even a text. Just a social media notification. My heart jumped, not because I cared about online updates, but because sometimes that's where my family shares moments, before they remember to share them with me. I unlocked the phone and opened the app. There they were. All of them. Nate, my son, wearing the navy blue sweater I sent him last December. Alina beside him, glowing with her usual effortless charm, sun-kissed even in November. The kids, Leo and Mira, giggling around a long wooden table covered in food, golden turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, flickering candles. And a pie that wasn't mine. They were raising glasses, smiles stretching wide. The caption, Full House, Full Hearts. Happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours. I scanned the photo again, slowly. No doubt about it. Every chair at that table was filled. Every space spoken for. There was no room for me. I didn't cry. Not there, not then. I just turned, slid my coat over my shoulders, and walked toward the exit. Past the idle taxis, past the shuttle stops and hotel courtesy vans. I didn't have a destination, but I knew this. I would not be standing there when they decided to remember me. 3 days before my flight, Nate had called. That should have told me something. My son rarely calls unless there's a birthday to acknowledge, a problem to solve, or something logistical to coordinate. But that day, his tone was unusually upbeat, sweet, almost syrupy. Hey, Mom. Got anything going for Thanksgiving? I told him my plans were simple. Stay home. Roast a chicken small enough to manage. Maybe bake a pie if my hands weren't too stiff. Watch something black and white with the radio murmuring in the background. Nothing fancy. Just me and the quiet. There was a pause. I could hear it. The kind that stretches too long, like someone measuring their words. Well, he said, the kids were asking about you. Thought maybe this year you could come here instead. Everyone's gonna be together. Wouldn't feel right without you. That phrase, wouldn't feel right without you, it stuck somewhere deep. I hadn't heard something like that in longer than I cared to admit. Needed? Sure. I'd been called on for favors, for childcare, for recipes, for advice. But wanted? That's something else entirely. That's rare. So I said yes. He didn't offer to book the ticket or cover any of the travel costs, and I didn't expect him to. I still had the envelope tucked in the drawer, the one with the extra bills from last Christmas, just in case. This, I decided, was an in case. After we hung up, I just sat still, holding the phone in both hands like it might ring again. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly excited. Not obligated. Not anxious. Just pure, warm anticipation. It had been years. That evening, I went online and found a nonstop flight discounted, though still a stretch for me. I paid the extra $14 to choose a seat with more legroom. It felt like a luxury, but if I was crossing the country for the first time in over a decade, I wanted to do it with some dignity. The next day, I went to the shops. Not just for gifts, though I did find 2 books for the kids, one about space, one about sea creatures, and a tin of dark chocolate truffles I remembered Alina once mentioning in passing. But I bought something for myself, too. A cardigan. Deep navy. Wool so soft I couldn't help but run my hand over it twice. It hung just right at the hips, flattering but comfortable. It made me feel like someone who might belong in a holiday photo. I packed 3 days early, checked the forecast in Fairhaven, lowered the thermostat, took out the trash, and washed every dish in the sink. I didn't tell my bridge group I was leaving. I wasn't ready for the questions, the raised eyebrows, the cautious optimism. And maybe, just maybe, I was afraid that saying it out loud would somehow make it vanish. It had been so long since anyone said, "Come, we want you here." I flew out Thanksgiving morning. The airport was alive with motion, families tugging suitcases, travelers with neck pillows shaped like cartoon animals, someone playing a harmonica near a window. I smiled at a toddler wearing socks that looked like tiny turkeys. I caught the eye of another older woman, a paperback open in her lap. We shared a knowing look, 2 women carrying silent stories, flying toward expectations wrapped in ribbons of hope. When the plane landed, I brushed crumbs from my skirt and ran a hand over my coat. I had worn my best shoes, black, with a delicate heel and just enough shine to suggest I still remembered what it meant to be seen. The walk from baggage claim to the exit stretched out longer than I remembered. Maybe it was the weight of my bag, or maybe it was something else entirely. I wheeled my suitcase past the coffee stands, the scattered clusters of families reuniting, and a young woman crying quietly into her partner's shoulder. I didn't feel angry, just out of place. Like someone had hit pause on my life, while the rest of the world kept moving forward without interruption. Outside, the sky was blanketed in that familiar gray haze you only find in northern towns during late November, dull and heavy, making even the air feel reluctant to move. My phone remained silent. No missed calls. No texts. I checked the time again. 3:54 p.m. dinner probably wouldn't be until 5:30 or 6 o'clock, I told myself. Maybe they were caught up in the usual holiday chaos, the kids bouncing off the walls, the turkey taking longer than expected. Dozens of harmless explanations. But even the most harmless reasons begin to sting when you're standing alone on a curb surrounded by arrivals and embraces that don't belong to you. I stood there for another 20 minutes before my knees began to ache. Finally, I sat on a bench near the loading zone, watching as strangers were whisked away by people who knew their names. I saw a woman in a shiny red parka rush forward with a paper cup and hand it to her mother-in-law, a warm drink and a quick embrace. The older woman looked well past 70. That hug, brief, tight, real, landed right in the softest part of my chest. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and made the call. Nate didn't answer. I left a message. Said I'd landed safely. Said I was outside near the usual pickup point, door B, under the sign with the plane icon. Said I hoped everything was all right and that I'd wait a little longer. But I already knew. I knew it before I opened the app again, before the image loaded, before I saw the long wooden table and the deep red cranberry sauce in the serving bowl I once gave them, before I read the caption about gratitude and togetherness. It wasn't the first time I'd been forgotten, but it was the first time I allowed myself to admit that's what it was. I stood up, brushed off the back of my coat, and grabbed the suitcase handle. No taxi, no rideshare. Just me and the concrete beneath my feet. A man pushing a stroller past me and gave a tired smile. I nodded back. Funny how, at airports, or just outside them, you can sometimes feel more seen by strangers than by your own blood. It was close to 5 by then. The air had turned colder, sharper. That particular kind of chill that sneaks under your collar and quietly asks, "So, what now?" I didn't answer. I just kept walking. My shoes weren't meant for this much distance, but I didn't stop. Roughly half a mile out, past the chain-link fence near the car rental drop-off, I saw it. A squat, single-story building with a blinking neon sign that read, Tina's Diner. The eye flickered on and off like it was catching its breath. The windows were fogged from warmth inside, and a few faded paper turkeys had been taped to the glass. I stepped in. The bell above the door gave a hollow chime. The air inside smelled like cinnamon and something fried. Old booths with cracked vinyl. Yellowing menus. A counter with metal stools polished by years of elbows and coffee mugs. Maybe 6 people total. A man in a delivery uniform. An elderly couple not speaking, just eating side by side. A waitress with a ponytail and sneakers who looked up, smiled, and said, "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart." "Same to you," I said. And my voice, surprisingly, didn't shake. I chose a booth near the window and slid in. The seat was still warm from the last customer, the table wiped clean. I took off my coat. "Kitchen's a little slow today," the waitress said, placing a menu in front of me. "But we've got turkey and pie." "Pie sounds just right," I replied. She gave a knowing grin. "Pumpkin, pecan, or key lime?" "Pumpkin," I said. "And some tea, please." "You got it." While I waited, I looked out the window. My suitcase rested beside me like a faithful companion, its plastic wheels smudged with airport dust. My phone lay face down on the table. When it vibrated once, I didn't turn it over. The pie arrived first. Warm, with a small, uneven swirl of whipped cream softening on top. The tea came next, strong and slightly bitter. Exactly how I like it. I took a bite. Then another. It was the best pie I'd had in years, not necessarily because of the spices or the crust, but because, for once, I hadn't made it for anyone else. I wasn't waiting for compliments. I wasn't serving it to a room that wouldn't remember. I ate slowly, deliberately. I didn't rush. I didn't scroll through my phone. I didn't hope for the door to swing open with someone panting out an apology. They weren't coming. Not today. Maybe not ever. And still, there I was, whole, breathing, sitting beneath faded decorations in a booth warm with borrowed heat, letting the tea thaw my fingers and the silence settle gently around me. When the waitress brought the bill, she asked, "Want another slice to go?" I considered it, then nodded. "Yes, for later." She winked. "Best decision you'll make all day." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because she was right. The cold cut deeper when I stepped outside. The little white bag holding my second slice of pie swung from one hand, while my suitcase trailed behind with a quiet rattle. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I hadn't booked a hotel. There was no guest room waiting. But I didn't feel entirely lost. Not anymore. There's a strange kind of peace that settles in once you stop expecting the people who've hurt you to be the ones who make it right. The wind pressed harder against my coat as I walked. Just ahead, across a parking lot and next to a chain pharmacy, stood the Silver Pine Inn, a squat beige building with fluorescent lights, square windows, and a vending machine near the door. A sign out front offered weekly rates and late check-in. It wasn't much, but it was something. And tonight, that was enough. Inside the lobby, a man behind the front desk glanced up from a small television playing a football game. He looked worn down by long hours and fryer grease, but he gave a polite nod when our eyes met. And for the first time that day, I felt like I had arrived somewhere I was meant to be. "Need a room?" the man behind the counter asked, barely glancing up from his screen. "Yes," I said, smoothing the front of my cardigan. "Just for tonight. A single." I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection on the plexiglass divider. My best shoes scuffed from the pavement. My cardigan clung with a faint scent of recycled air and hand sanitizer. I nodded again, more firmly this time. Single. He slid a registration form toward me. ID and card. I handed them over without a word. While he typed, I let my eyes drift to the television mounted in the corner. A football game flickered across the screen. Some team in maroon and gold was losing by more than just points. The clerk didn't seem to notice or care. "Room 114, he said, sliding me a plastic key fob on a flimsy silver ring. "End of the row." "Thanks," I said, taking it with a polite nod. I wheeled my suitcase out across the cracked sidewalk, the wheels catching slightly on a loose stone. The room was exactly what I expected, and somehow more comforting because of it. 2 mismatched lamps, a bedspread printed in tired browns and olives, a television as thick as a suitcase. But the heater hummed gently, the light switches worked, and the bathroom, miraculously, was spotless. I took off my shoes slowly. My feet throbbed, my lower back more so. But my heart, the part that should have been shattered, felt strangely intact, as if the ache had finally burned itself clean. I stared at the phone for a long while before I turned it over. There it was, 3 missed calls from Nate, 2 from Alina, and a single message. "Mom, where are you?" No apology, no context, no acknowledgement of the photo or the table I wasn't seated at. Just confusion, as if I were the one who hadn't shown up, as if I had simply vanished into the air. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached into my suitcase and pulled out the small spiral notebook I used for grocery lists and thoughts too tender to speak aloud. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "I am not spare. I am not extra. I am not a side dish at someone else's table." I stared at those words for a long time, then underlined them. Once, firmly. A year ago, I might have cried. 5 years ago, I absolutely would have. But tonight, no tears came. What rose in me instead was something colder, cleaner, like stepping into clear lake water. It startled. It clarified. It wasn't just about this one holiday. Not just the airport. It was about all the moments that led here, quiet, cumulative, corrosive. I remembered birthdays missed, calls not returned, invitations extended like errands. I remembered Christmas 2 Decembers ago, when Alina said on the phone, "We'd love to have you over, if it's not too much trouble getting here." The way her voice faltered on the if. I went anyway, made a ham, took the bus. I remembered Nate's 42nd birthday. I'd mailed him a leather wallet with his initials stamped in gold. He responded with a group text that read, "Thanks for the gifts, everyone." No mention of mine. I remembered Myra's school play. I'd found the live stream link myself and watched it on my old laptop, the sound slightly off, a glass of wine in my hand and a knot in my throat. She didn't know I was watching. No one did. And still, I kept showing up. Until today. Maybe it takes standing alone on a curb in a strange city to see the outline of what's been there all along. I wasn't part of their life, not really. I was an accessory, a placeholder, a familiar voice they could feel good about remembering when it was convenient. I glanced around the motel room. Plain, worn, unadorned, but honest. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. And somehow, that made it the most truthful place I'd been in years. I brewed a cup of weak motel tea using the little in-room machine and sat cross-legged on the bed. I opened the white paper bag, peeled back the wax paper, and forked into the second slice of pie. No porcelain plate, no linen napkin. Just me, a plastic fork, and something warm that tasted like mine. I'd earned that slice. Every bite of it. Above the bed, the ceiling had a fine crack that ran like a forgotten road across the plaster. I watched it while the heater coughed and clicked. Outside, the wind scraped the building's siding, and somewhere nearby, a car engine turned over, then faded. A man 2 doors down was coughing harsh, heavy, relentless. A toilet flushed. The night wasn't peaceful, but it was honest. Sometime after 2 a.m., I drifted into sleep, still in the clothes I'd arrived in, my scratchy motel blanket pulled up to my chin, my notebook open on the nightstand beside me like a small declaration. I didn't unpack. I didn't even wash my face. But I slept. In the morning, I woke before the sun. A habit my body refuses to break, no matter how old I get. Even in retirement, it insists on being ready before anyone asks. I brewed another watery cup of coffee from the machine, cracked open the blinds, and watched the sky shift. The pie was gone. The tea, too. But the quiet stayed. At 7:12, the phone buzzed again. "Mom, I'm so sorry. There was a mix-up with the schedule. We thought your flight was today. Can you come by the house? The kids really want to see you." No mention of the photo. No reference to the dinner. No apology. Just confusion and a request. "Can you?" I stared at the message, then set the phone face down on the table. I didn't respond. Instead, I dressed. I brushed my hair, applied a little lipstick, just a soft coral, the one that never goes out of style. It wasn't about them. I wasn't going. It was about me, about dignity, about remembering that I still got to decide how I entered the world, even if no one was watching. The lobby offered a bowl of bruised apples and a carafe of burnt coffee. I took an apple and slipped it into my bag. I checked out quietly. The man behind the desk didn't look up from the football recap blaring on his phone. Outside, the world had changed again. The wind had calmed. The sky was brittle blue, sharp, clear, endless. The kind of morning that belongs only to November. And this time, I didn't look back. I didn't go back to the airport right away. Instead, I walked. There was something I needed to do first. Roughly a mile down the road, tucked between a self-serve gas station and a shuttered tire shop, was a narrow storefront with flickering lights, Northridge Postal Annex. The sign buzzed softly above the door. I stepped inside. Behind the counter stood a young woman with chipped lavender nail polish and a tired but kind smile. She wore a sweater with reindeer on it and looked like someone who still believed in handwritten letters. "Do you sell stamps?" I asked. "Sure do," she said, already reaching beneath the counter. "What kind do you need?" "Just one," I replied. "For a letter to West Landon." She nodded and slid over a single stamp and an envelope. I asked for a pen, and she handed me one with a dangling purple tassel. I stood at the side counter and wrote the address from memory. Emery Wexley, 24, Pond Hollow Lane, Wendell, WL 60918, my granddaughter. Emery is Nate's daughter from his first marriage, the only one who still calls me just to talk. She's 23 now, finishing her last semester of nursing school. She sends me pictures of her rescue cat, messages me when she passes her exams, and once called me at midnight asking for my cornbread stuffing recipe. For a moment, the envelope stayed blank. Then I opened my notebook, tore out a page, and began writing. "Emery, my dear, you once told me I was your safe place. That meant more to me than almost anything else in the world. This Thanksgiving didn't go the way I imagined. I flew across the country for a table that was never truly set for me. But in the silence that followed, I found something unexpected: space. Space to remember who I am without needing someone else to say it first. I kept writing, not with bitterness, not with drama, just truth. When I sealed the envelope and pressed the stamp into place, I felt something lift. A small but certain weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. At 10:35 a.m., I booked a return ticket home. Same airline, same terminal, same seat even. But the woman boarding that plane later wouldn't be the same. With hours to spare, I found a small cafe 2 blocks from the terminal. It had sunlit windows, shelves of paperbacks for sale, and surprisingly good cranberry scones. I ordered a pot of tea and sat at a corner table with my notebook open, writing down all the things I'd never dared say aloud. I didn't write to Nate. I didn't call Alina. I didn't explain where I was. They'd see the missed return call. Maybe they'd wonder. Maybe they wouldn't. I wasn't angry. I was done. By late afternoon, around 4 o'clock, the light outside shifted. That golden hour glow that turns even strip malls into paintings. I looked up just in time to see a small boy sprinting across the parking lot, his backpack bouncing behind him. He turned to wave at his grandmother, who followed slowly, smiling as she reached for his hand. He grabbed it tightly, as if it was the only thing holding him to the ground. I watched them until they disappeared behind a silver minivan. And I whispered softly, to no one but myself, not bitter or broken, just honest. I deserved that, too. The flight home was half empty, a quiet gift I hadn't expected. I had an entire row to myself. I chose the window seat. The plastic was cold against my back, and I left it that way. I didn't fold my coat or buckle in immediately. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to arrange myself neatly for someone else's comfort. A flight attendant stopped by with a gentle smile. Heading home or leaving it, she asked, placing a cup of water on my tray. Both, I said, in a way. She nodded and moved on, offering the kind of understanding that's rare and precious, unspoken, patient, real. As the plane taxied and rose into the dusk, I stared out the window. The city below shrank to gray geometry, the runways crisscrossing like faint scars. As we ascended, the sky opened wider, soft blue above, darker blue below, and between them only the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of my breathing. I thought I might feel grief, a fresh wave of it, or maybe the familiar ache that often comes in quiet places. I waited for it, the way you wait for turbulence. But it didn't come. I didn't feel peace either. Not quite. But I felt still. Grounded. Present. That was new. Halfway through the flight, I reached into my bag and turned on my phone. Just to check the time, I told myself. But of course, the screen lit up with messages. For new texts from Nate. One voicemail. Mom, I'm really sorry. Please call me. The kids were asking where you were. Alina thought you knew we moved dinner to Wednesday. Can we talk? I didn't open the voicemail. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit. Let it wait the way I had waited. Then I turned the phone off again and placed it back in my bag. By the time we landed, the sky was already dark. My little city glowed in that familiar, understated way, dim streetlights, quiet windows, storefronts already decorated for the next holiday. The shuttle driver was an older man with kind eyes and a voice like gravel. Visiting family? He asked as we pulled out of the airport lot. Not exactly, I said with a smile. At home, the porch light still burned a small, steady promise. I had left it on out of habit. As if expecting to return with arms full of leftovers and stories, my heart warmed by the noise of people I belonged to. Instead, I returned with a half-full notebook, a used tea bag in my coat pocket, and a clarity I hadn't known I'd needed. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old wood. The radiator clinked awake as I stepped in, its welcome echo familiar and flawed. I hung up my coat, set the suitcase down. I moved slowly, not from weariness, but with intention. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once hosted Thanksgivings, where Nate spilled gravy, where Emery once cut snowflakes from linen napkins, where Alina sat in silence, scrolling her phone more than meeting my eyes. I looked around the room like it belonged to someone I was still getting to know. Then I opened the drawer by the refrigerator. That drawer. The one with the files. The one labeled Nate. Emery. Legal. And I exhaled, not in fear, not in sadness, but in readiness. I pulled out the folder labeled Nathaniel. It was thick, stuffed with receipts, scans of old checks, copies of tuition assistance applications, an invoice from a mechanic I paid when his transmission gave out, the co-signed mortgage documents from 2011, and the deposit slip for Myra's private preschool, the one I'd fronted without question. Taped to that one was a sticky note in Alina's handwriting. We'll pay you back once Nate's bonus clears. They never did. I turned each page slowly, like tending to half-healed bruises. Not in anger, not in grief, but with a kind of clarity I hadn't allowed myself before. Then I reached for the thinner folder marked Emery. Inside, birthday cards with glittery cats, snapshots of her standing in front of dorm buildings and hiking trails, a printout of her nursing school graduation announcement, thank you notes written in bubbly purple ink. A postcard from a fall trip to Vermont. Wish you were here. The trees are wild and wonderful. I closed both folders and leaned back in the chair. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the fridge. Then I reached for my notebook. And this time, I didn't write reflections. I wrote a plan. The next morning, I stood on the frosty steps of Greenstead Community Bank before the doors even opened. The steps were slick with ice, but I climbed them anyway, slow, steady, wearing my oldest boots and that same navy cardigan. The cardigan didn't match my scarf, but I didn't care about matching anymore. I cared about motion, about meaning. Inside, the teller greeted me with a cautious smile, the kind reserved for people they think might need help remembering their PIN. "Good morning, Mrs. Ellery. How can we help you today?" "I'd like to speak to someone about my accounts," I said. "All of them." He nodded quickly and tapped something on his screen before disappearing into the back. A few minutes later, I was led into a small glass-walled office that smelled faintly of copier ink and carpet cleaner. A woman introduced herself as Natalie, my account manager. She looked like someone who carried almonds in her handbag and walked laps during her lunch break. "What can I do for you today, Mrs. Ellery?" "I want to suspend all automatic payments," I said. "Every one. Effective today." She blinked. "All of them." "Yes." Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Her eyes scanned the screen. "You've got several recurring transfers," she said carefully. 2 tuition contributions, an auto insurance payment for a vehicle not in your name, 3 scheduled deposits to family members, and a handful of charitable donations. "Keep the charities," I said. "Stop everything else." She paused. "Would you like to talk about—" "No," I said, looking her square in the eyes. "I've spent enough time explaining myself." To her credit, she didn't fill the space with soft-sounding filler words. She just nodded and went back to typing. While she worked, I stared out the window. Across the parking lot, a woman wrestled a toddler into a car seat. A man with a cane shuffled down the sidewalk. A delivery truck idled at the curb. Life, moving forward, not waiting for permission. All set, Natalie said at last, "Everything's been suspended. If you'd like to return tomorrow, I can have the paperwork prepared for permanent cancellation. I'll be back." She hesitated again. "There's also a power of attorney on file." 4. She glanced at the screen. "Nathaniel Ellery. Do you still want him to have access?" My pulse didn't spike. It slowed. "No," I said calmly. "Revoke it." "Understood." She printed a form and slid it across the desk. I signed it without a tremor. When I stepped outside, the frost had melted from the steps. The sun had broken through, warming the sidewalk in faint patches. I didn't rush. I stopped at the corner bakery, bought myself a warm oat roll, and walked the long way home. It wasn't about punishing Nate. Not really. It was about drawing a line where, for too long, there had only been forgiveness. Love doesn't thrive on sacrifice alone. It needs air. It needs truth. Back home, I pulled the pie dish from the sink. I washed it gently, dried it by hand, and placed it back on the shelf. Maybe someday I'd bake another pie. Maybe I wouldn't. But I knew I would never again bake one for people who left me standing at an airport curb. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. Mr. Halbert had been our family attorney for over 3 decades. He'd helped us close on the house, handled my husband's estate, and drafted the first version of my will in 2006. His voice was calm and courteous, like always. "Mrs. Ellery, how can I assist you?" "I'd like to make some changes to my estate," I said. "And I want to establish a trust for my granddaughter." Just her. There was a pause, brief, respectful. "Yes, absolutely." He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. Men like Mr. Halbert have seen every version of family neglect dressed up as love. We arranged a meeting for the next morning. When I hung up, I felt no triumph, no resentment, just resolution. That evening, I sat on the porch wrapped in a thick blanket, my tea cooling on the rail. A few neighbors passed by. One gave me a wave. One kept their head down. The street was quiet. I wasn't okay. Not exactly. Not healed either. but I felt steady, like someone who'd finally stopped knocking on a door that was never going to open. The next morning, the sky was a soft, pale gray, the kind of winter light that wraps around rooftops like gauze. I dressed slowly, not from fatigue, but from care. I chose a plain blouse, a wool skirt, and a scarf I hadn't worn in years. By 9 o'clock sharp, I was stepping through the doors of Halberd and Damp, Finch, a small, 2-story building with green shutters and a front mat that read "Welcome Back." The reception area smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Nothing had changed, not the gold-framed photos of his bulldog in a Santa hat or his daughters posing with fishing rods. Mr. Halberd stood when I entered, same as he always had. "Mrs. Ellery," he said, reaching out his hand. "It's good to see you," I said as I settled into the leather chair. "And you," replied Mr. Halberd. We sat across from each other in his office, the same one as always. Same ticking wall clock. Same neat stack of legal forms. Same worn desk, polished to a soft gleam. Only his glasses had thickened over the years, and his mustache had faded from steel gray to pure white. "What are we changing today?" he asked gently. "My will," I said. "And I want to create a trust." He nodded once and reached for a legal pad. "Everything I own," I continued. "Every cent, every asset, I want it protected. And I want it to go to Emery. Only Emery." He didn't blink. "Just begin taking notes. I assume we're removing Nathaniel and Alina?" "Yes," I said. "They've had enough from me. More than enough." He looked up briefly at that, but didn't comment. "I want it airtight," I went on. "No gaps, no wiggle room. Emery is the sole beneficiary. She gets everything once I'm gone. Until then, she'll have access for school, housing, healthcare, or emergencies. I'll decide what qualifies as an emergency while I'm alive." He allowed himself a small smile. "You've thought this through." "I have. And the house, your pension, your CDs, everything in your name goes into the trust?" "Exactly. No exceptions. You'll retain full control while living?" "Of course." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Emery's a good girl. Always has been." Something in my throat caught then, but I swallowed it. "She's the only one who still sees me as a person," I said, voice quiet. "Not as a wallet." He didn't flinch at the edge in my tone. Just nodded, professional but warm. "Then let's make sure your wishes are honored." For the next hour, we went through each item, line by line. He asked precise questions. I gave unshakable answers. No more uncertainty. No more misplaced trust. When we finished, he stacked the forms neatly in a folder and looked at me with something close to admiration. "I'll have the final draft ready in a few days," he said. "Once it's notarized, it'll all be official." "Thank you," I replied, and I meant it. Outside, the air had turned crisp and clean. I walked home slowly, stopping at the corner florist to buy a small poinsettia. I didn't decorate much anymore, but I wanted something red and living for the kitchen table. Something that wasn't just memory. The moment I stepped inside, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but for once, I picked up. "Grandma?" It was Emery. Her voice breathy, unsure, familiar, filled the quiet room. "I got your letter." I sat down at the kitchen table, the envelope from the florist still in my hand. "You did." "I didn't know what happened," she said, sounding almost winded. "Dad and Alina said you canceled your flight at the last minute. Like you just changed your mind." "Of course they did." "I was there," I said softly. "I landed. I waited. I saw the photos." There was silence on the other end. Then, in a voice barely audible, "I'm so sorry." "I didn't know." "I know, sweetheart," I said. "It's not your fault. You didn't make that choice." "I should have called," she whispered. "I should have checked. You couldn't have known. You're not the one who forgot me." She sniffled quietly, trying to hold it together. "I missed you so much that day. It didn't feel right without you." And for the first time since the airport, tears pressed behind my eyes. But they didn't fall. Not this time. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." There was a stillness between us full, Not awkward. "Grandma," she said finally, "can I come visit next weekend? I've got a break from classes. I can take the train." My heart filled gently and painfully at the same time. "Of course," I said. "The guest room's ready." "I'll bring the chessboard," she added. "You still play?" I never stopped. We hung up a few minutes later. I sat there at the table, my hand resting on the phone. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel dismissed. I felt seen. That Saturday, just after noon, I stood on the small platform of the Edgewater train station, bundled in my warmest coat. The platform smelled like diesel and wet concrete, the sky a flat silver. I held a paper bag in my hands, a sandwich and an apple, just in case she'd forgotten to eat. Then I saw her. She stepped off the 1137 from Wendell wearing a baggy hoodie and jeans, her dark curls tucked beneath a knitted beanie, a worn canvas bag slung over one shoulder. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her. Not hardened, just sharper, like someone coming into her own. Then she spotted me. Her face lit up with something so pure, so unmistakable, it stole my breath. She ran to me and hugged me tight. Real. Solid. No explanations, no tension. Just arms wrapped around me. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered into my shoulder. "Hi, baby," I said. "You're here." The drive home was quiet, peaceful. Emery looked out the window as if memorizing every street again. I drove slower than usual, letting her take it all in. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, but everything felt new with her beside me. Back at the house, I brewed tea while she dropped her bag in the guest room. When she returned, she curled into the corner of the living room couch like she'd never left. The chessboard waited on the coffee table, already set up. We played a game. She won. Then we played another. I won that one. Later, we sat at the kitchen table, both of us holding mugs of tea. The poinsettia sat in the center, still red, still blooming, still alive. "I read your letter again on the train," Emery said, her finger tracing the rim of her mug. "I've never seen you write like that before." "I've never had to," I replied. "I used to think being quiet was a form of grace. Lately, I think it just made me easier to overlook." Emery looked up, brows furrowed. "I never ignored you." "I know." She paused, like she was weighing something. "Dad doesn't know I'm here." I nodded, unsurprised. "He called a few nights ago," she continued. "Asked if I'd seen you since Thanksgiving. I didn't lie. I just said we hadn't spoken yet. That was kind," I said. She shook her head. "It wasn't kindness. It was exhaustion. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine." That caught me. Emery had always been diplomatic, soft-spoken, the one who soothed the edges in her fractured family. To hear her say it like that, calm, steady, told me she was becoming something stronger. "You don't have to pretend here," I said. She nodded. "Neither do you." We sat in silence for a while, sipping our tea. And for the first time in weeks, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need Nate or Alina to grovel or send carefully worded messages about what went wrong. I didn't need a voicemail apology or a retroactive invitation. I had this. My home. My tea. My granddaughter. I had myself. That evening, Emery offered to make dinner. She boiled pasta with garlic and spinach, and I grated cheese while we chatted about school, her roommates, a podcast she liked, nothing heavy. Afterward, we watched a silly movie and laughed far too loudly at jokes that weren't really that funny. Before bed, she sat beside me on the couch. "Grandma," she said, voice low, "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," I told her. "Promise?" "I can't promise forever," I said. "But I'm not going anywhere yet." She smiled, then hugged me again. Softer this time, but no less true. After she went to sleep, I stayed in the living room with only the soft ticking of the mantel clock for company. I looked at the photos lined up along the shelf, some faces faded, some frames now empty. One photo remained in the center. Me, holding Emery as a baby. My hair was darker then. My hands looked younger. But the way I held her, that grip, was exactly the same. Protective. Certain. I stared at that photo a long time. Then I turned off the lamp and went to bed. Emery left Sunday afternoon. We lingered on the porch for a few minutes before her train. I handed her a container of pasta, a scarf I'd knitted last winter, and a quiet kind of love that needed no explanation. She kissed my cheek and promised to call on Tuesday. Then she was gone, a wave from the train window, her breath fogging the glass. I stood on the platform until the train became a line in the distance. Then I went home. The house felt quieter than usual, but not in a hollow way. More like the hush that follows after something true has finally been said. A silence with shape, with meaning. I moved through the room slowly. I picked up mugs, folded the throw blanket from the couch, returned the chessboard to its shelf. Everything in its place. Then I went to the kitchen and opened the drawer. The folders were still there. Nate's still thick with paper. Emery's still light. But it wasn't about comparing them anymore. It wasn't even about them, really. It was about me. I pulled out a yellow notepad and began writing. Line by line, I listed every financial contribution I could remember from the last 15 years. Not just money directly handed over, but the invisible things, quiet coverage of expenses no one ever acknowledged. Roof repairs, insurance deductibles, legal retainers. That second vehicle when Nate left his first marriage. Grocery runs when Alina was too tired to shop. School raffles. Fundraisers. Tuition gaps. Guilt-wrapped checks that were easier than being asked again. By the time I finished, the list stretched across 4 pages. I stared at the numbers, the years. I'd never thought of myself as particularly generous. Just dependable. Practical. Someone who helped because that's what mothers do. That's what I did. Looking at that notepad, I saw it clearly. I hadn't just helped. I'd subsidized their lives. And what I got in return was politeness. Surface smiles. Hollow birthdays. A folding chair near the coat rack when the main table was full. I wasn't angry. I was done. At 3:17 p.m., the phone rang. Nathaniel. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message. Then a text. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Hope everything's okay. Let me know when you're free to talk. No urgency. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the soft, practiced tone of someone who's hoping things have quietly reset. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't stood alone on a curb while he carved turkey and smiled for photos I was never meant to be in. I deleted the voicemail without listening. I left the text unread. That night, I lit a candle. No special reason. Just for the light. For the hush of the kitchen. For the way the flame reflected off the countertop like a ripple. I opened one of the good bottles of wine, the kind I used to save for holidays, and poured a glass. I set one place at the table. Heated leftover soup. Sat down. No scrolling. No waiting. No checking the time. I simply sat in my life. Later, before bed, I opened my email. Found the folder labeled travel. At the bottom sat the receipt for my Thanksgiving flight. I clicked on it. Then I clicked download. Round trip return complete. I forwarded the itinerary to myself and added a subject line, proof of departure and return. No rescue. No reunion. Just me. I didn't send it to anyone else. I didn't need to. The next morning, I called Mr. Halbert again. I've been thinking, I told him, I want to add something to the trust. Of course, he said. What are you considering? I want Emery to be the sole executor. But I also want a letter attached. Not legal, personal. You can include a statement of intent, he said. It won't affect the legality, but it can clarify your reasons. Good, I said. Then I'll write it. That same morning, I sat at the kitchen table, slid a fresh sheet into my notebook, and began, to whoever is reading this after I'm gone, if you're wondering why things were divided this way, let me be clear, this is not punishment. It's honesty. I've spent a lifetime giving quietly, consistently, but love without respect isn't love, and presence without care isn't family. I chose the one person who saw me before I disappeared. I didn't finish the letter that day. Some things deserve to be written slowly. Tuesday passed without a call from Emery, but not because she forgot. We had agreed. She had clinicals that week and didn't want to be distracted. I'll call Friday, she'd said, after my shift. Same time. I trusted her. That morning, though, someone else called. Alina. Her name lit up the screen like a warning light, bright letters, bad timing. I let the call ring through. 30 seconds later, the text came. Hi, Irene. Hope you're well. Nathaniel mentioned you've been hard to reach lately. Let's catch up soon. No punctuation where it mattered. No warmth where it counted. Catch up. We weren't former coworkers. We weren't neighbors trading cookie recipes. I'd been her mother-in-law for nearly 15 years. I'd helped her find her first real job when Mira was still in diapers. Sent her care packages after her gallbladder surgery. Paid for her mother's funeral flowers when the budget came up short. Catch up. I set the phone face down on the table. That afternoon, as if on cue, another message. This time from Nate. Mom. Alina tried calling. We're starting to get a little worried. Can you just let us know you're okay? The irony of it. They weren't worried when I was standing at gate 2B with cold fingers and a warm pie that never made it to their table. They weren't worried when I walked, suitcase in hand, toward a neon-lit diner in a city I wasn't invited into. They weren't worried when they posted a photo labeled everyone, glasses raised, not one chair empty. But now, when silence echoed back to them, now they panicked. Because silence is powerful. It unsettles the people used to your giving, your yes, your constant noise. It forces them to hear their own. I turned off the phone. Let the stillness ring louder than their messages. That evening, I climbed into the attic. Not for drama. Just to find an old recipe book, one Emery had asked about before. The one with my apple crisp recipe scribbled in cursive, margins dotted with changes and notes. I hadn't been up there in years. The air smelled of dust and dried pine. The insulation curled like brittle parchment, and the boxes sat where they always had labeled in faded marker. 1990 to 2005. I opened it, found the book, and beneath it, layers of memory. Cards from Nate as a teenager. Crayon drawings from Emery's early years. Thank you notes from cousins long since moved away. A photo of my husband in his best Sunday suit, holding a pumpkin pie like it was gold. I sat down on the floor, cross-legged. Let it all rest in my lap. So many pieces of myself I had packed away to make room for other people. I thought about Nate as a little boy, how he used to fall asleep with his head pressed against my chest. Your heart is louder than the rain, he once told me. I remembered how he'd cry if I left for work before he woke up. How I taught him to tie his shoes using 2 loops instead of 1, because it made more sense to him that way. I had loved him completely. I probably still did. But love doesn't excuse neglect. And forgiveness doesn't always mean return. I closed the box gently, placed the memories back where they belonged. That night, when the house was still and the world outside silent, I opened my notebook again and added 2 final lines to the letter for the trust. Emery, you saw me not out of obligation, not for what I gave you, but because you chose to. That's what family is. Choice, respect, truth. The pen felt heavier than usual in my hand. But I wrote anyway. The next day, I drove into town. Straight to the notary office, tucked into the back of a shipping store, past shelves of padded envelopes and novelty birthday cards. The man at the counter had careful hands and an easy way of speaking. His name tag read Dev. I need to notarize a letter, I told him, unfolding the pages. And some trust documents from my attorney. He glanced at the first sheet, then looked up. Big changes, he asked. I nodded. Long overdue ones. He didn't press. Just offered a clean pen and guided me through each signature, each page, with the quiet precision of someone who has seen all kinds of endings and beginnings pass across his counter. When it was done, I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but clearer. like the road ahead had fewer turns and fewer hands on the wheel that weren't mine. After the notary, I stopped by the grocery store, picked up a carton of milk, a handful of oranges, and a small bouquet of lilacs they'd marked half off. The kind of items you buy when life feels steady again. When you're no longer waiting for someone else to hand you peace, you simply choose it yourself. At home, I set the lilacs in the old chipped vase near the kitchen sink. Their scent drifted gently through the house, soft, purple, certain. I removed my coat, folded it with care, and draped it over the back of the dining chair. My phone buzzed as I was putting away the groceries. Nate, again. Mom, we really need to talk. You're not answering, and it's making things worse. I don't know what's going on, but we're worried. Please call me. The message was longer than usual. The edges of panic were beginning to show. But still, no real apology. No recognition. No ownership. Only absence, now made uncomfortable. He wasn't sorry for forgetting me. He was sorry I had stopped filling the silence for them. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then towered the phone off again. That afternoon, I pulled out the folders one last time, Nate's, Emery's, the documents from the trust. I placed them inside the fireproof lockbox and slid it beneath the bed. Not to hide them, but to close the chapter. I was finished. Finished explaining. Finished justifying. Finished waiting. That night, I made lentil soup. Carrots, garlic, herbs. My hands moved by memory, no recipes, no measuring. Just the rhythm of a woman who's fed others her whole life and finally remembered to feed herself. I set one place at the table. Not in mourning. Not in defiance. Just in quiet ritual. A moment of care for me. The soup was good. Later, I sat on the porch with a shawl across my shoulders. The air was brisk, the kind that doesn't ask for your attention but earns it anyway. The kind that tells you something is shifting. The streetlights flickered on, one by one. And I remembered a moment I hadn't thought of in years. Nate was 10. He'd come home from school with a split lip and muddy jeans. A boy had pushed him during recess. He didn't cry, just stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the blood from his hands. "It's fine," he'd said. "It's nothing." I had crouched next to him, tucked a strand of hair behind his ear, and said, "You're allowed to be hurt. That doesn't make you weak." I wish someone had said the same to me, because I had been hurt quietly, consistently for years. And I had let it pass without protest, thinking endurance was grace, thinking silence was strength. But it isn't. Not always. Sometimes it's just delay. Sometimes it's just the cost of being too polite. I sipped my tea and let the night press in. In the kitchen, the lilacs moved slightly in a draft. A soft blur of violet in the dark. Down the block, a dog barked once. A car pulled into a driveway. Someone laughed sharp, high from another life. And I sat in mine. No questions. No waiting. Just the weight of my own belonging. Finally, quietly whole. It was late Friday afternoon when the knock came. I was folding towels at the kitchen table, still warm from the dryer, when I heard it. 3 slow knocks, hesitant. Not the mail carrier. Not a neighbor. The kind of knock that carries history behind it. I opened the door. Alina. Her hair was too perfect, brushed and sprayed in the car, likely. She wore narrow heels, impractical for our uneven sidewalks, and carried a designer tote slung over one shoulder. Her face held that expression I had come to know well, part concern, part performance. "Irene," she said. Her voice laced with soft calculation. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. I just stepped aside. She entered the house slowly, eyes scanning the space like she expected disarray, some proof of absence or neglect. But the home looked just as it always had. Only the air had changed. I led her to the living room. She didn't sit until I did. She placed her tote carefully at her feet and folded her hands in her lap. "I know you're upset," she began, her tone polished, ready. "And I just want to say, this whole thing has been a huge misunderstanding." I said nothing. She pressed forward. "Nate thought your flight was on Friday. That's what he told me." We didn't realize you had already landed. And the photo? I asked. She blinked. What? The Thanksgiving photo. The one with the caption, "Full house. All of you at the table." Smiling, she looked down. That was just something I posted for the holiday. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did. She looked up too quickly, her face trying to catch up with the moment. Well, yes, but I think we need to move past that now. The kids miss you. Nate's been calling. We're all concerned. You've shut us out. I let out a breath, small but final. No, I said. I just stopped filling in the silence for you. That's different. Her mouth tightened. I came here because we want to make things right. I looked at her, really looked, at the precision of her makeup, at the posture that leaned slightly away, at the avoidance clinging to her like expensive perfume. No, I said. You came to see if I'm still useful. She sat up straighter. That's not fair. But it's true. She glanced toward the hallway as if half expecting Mate to step in, to save her from this conversation. But this wasn't his to save. And I was no longer waiting. I've given enough, I said, voice calm but final. More than enough. And I've decided where the rest of it goes. That got her attention. Alina's eyes narrowed slightly, the performance slipping at the edges. I'm not angry, I added. I'm not bitter. I'm just done. She inhaled, sharp and shallow. This isn't like you, Irene. I know, I said. But it's like me now. There was a pause. She shifted, discomfort drawing her posture taut. Does Nathaniel know you've made changes? I imagine, I said, he's starting to suspect. Her face flickered, the edges of her confidence softening. And the house? Your accounts. All taken care of. The silence that followed was thick, not angry, but absolute. A quiet reckoning neither of us needed to name. Finally, she reached for her tote bag and stood. Well, she said, her voice clipped now formal. I'm sorry you feel this way. I gave a small smile. Just enough. No, you're sorry I stopped accepting less than I deserve. She didn't reply, just walked to the door. At the threshold, she hesitated. Nathaniel really is worried. He should be, I said. Not because I'm gone, but because I'm not coming back. She left, and the door closed behind her with the softest click. I stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, the air still humming from everything unsaid. Then I turned, walked back into the kitchen, finished folding the towels, lit a candle, and made myself a cup of tea. The phone rang once that evening. Nathaniel again. I let it go. Not out of cruelty, but because the silence, at last, belonged to me. Saturday arrived quietly. I woke early, not out of habit or obligation, but because my body had rediscovered its own rhythm, one no longer dictated by someone else's schedule or expectations. The sky was soft and pale, the kind of morning that doesn't press or promise, just exists. I wrapped myself in the old quilt that lived on the back of the porch chair and brought my tea outside. Steam curled gently from the mug. Down the street, a child shouted. A skateboard rattled against the pavement. Winter hadn't arrived yet, but you could hear it waiting. I thought about Alina's visit. Not with resentment. Not with anger. Just with distance. Like watching someone else remember a conversation they never really had. She hadn't come for peace. She came to reclaim control. And for the first time in a long time, I hadn't given it. That was the quiet victory. Not in winning. Not in confrontation. But in staying rooted. In choosing honesty over harmony. In no longer performing grace to protect someone else's comfort. That afternoon, Emery called. Her voice came through bright, steady. Hi, Grandma. I'm on break, but I wanted to check in. How's your week been? Eventful, I said, sipping my second cup of tea. But steady. She caught the tone. Something happened? Meline stopped by. Oh, she and Nathaniel wanted to make things right, I said. Did they? No, there was a pause. I heard her exhale through her teeth. I'm sorry. Don't be. I wasn't surprised. But I wasn't shaken either. Another pause, softer this time. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "You sound different." "Do I?" "Stronger." I smiled. "I think I am." We talked for a while about her patience, a paper she was writing, her cat knocking over a lamp she liked. The everyday details that stitch real lives together. When we hung up, I didn't feel the familiar ache of goodbye. I felt connected, present, whole. Later that afternoon, I started clearing drawers in the guest room. Not out of urgency, just readiness. I wanted to decide what mattered, what stayed, what would be offered forward. I found a set of linens I hadn't used in years. Emery might like those. Then I came across a small velvet box, a pair of silver earrings I'd once set aside for Myra's 16th birthday, before I learned that gifts from me often went unopened or simply disappeared. I held them a long time. Simple, elegant, classic. I had bought them when she was still in diapers, imagining her years later, standing in front of a mirror before a school dance, tucking them into her ears. But that moment never belonged to me. I set the earrings aside, not bitterly, just finally. That evening, I opened my notebook, not to write a letter, but a list. On one page, I wrote, "Things I no longer owe, explanations, second chances to those who waste first ones, apologies for taking up space, a seat at a table that won't make room, silence." Then, on the next page, I made another list. Things I still have. My name, my peace, my mind, my home, my granddaughter's voice in my ear, saying, "Stronger." I tore out the second page, folded it neatly, and taped it to the inside of the cabinet under the sink, right beside the dish gloves and the backup sponges. A strange place to keep strength, but real. That night, I set the table for one again. But this time, I lit 2 candles. Not because someone was coming, because I was here fully. I ladled out soup, sat down, let the candlelight catch the edges of the glass, the silverware, the folds of the napkin. And I whispered softly, simply, not for drama, not for pain, I'm still here. And I was. On the first Sunday of December, I decorated the porch. Nothing elaborate. Just a fresh pine wreath with a red ribbon and 2 strings of soft white lights woven along the railings. Not for the neighbors. Not for tradition. Not for nostalgia. I did it because I wanted the house to shine for me. For once. Inside, I put the kettle on, turned the dial of the old radio, and let slow jazz drift softly through the rooms. I used to decorate for the kids, stockings stitched with names, cookies shaped like stars, the faded felt Angel Emery made in her first year of school. But this year, there would be no stockings. No folding chairs from the garage. No waiting for someone else to arrive and make the house feel whole. This year, I lit the fire early and set one place for tea. My own. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops across the street, the phone rang. Nathaniel. I answered. "Mom." His voice was thinner than I remembered, like it had been pressed through too many filters of guilt and distance. "I'm here," I said. "Calm. Steady." There was a pause. "I didn't think you'd pick up." "I know." Another pause. Longer this time. "I saw the paperwork," he said. "From the attorney. The trust. The changes. I figured you would." His breath caught, like he'd expected a different tone. A softer one. One that reached for understanding instead of drawing a line. I don't understand." After everything exactly I said, interrupting gently. After everything. He went quiet. "You mean the money?" he asked, eventually. "I mean the pattern," I replied. "The forgetting. The missed calls. The birthdays. The airport. That photo. That wasn't intentional." "No," I said. "It was worse than that. It was convenient. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was honest." "You're punishing us," he said, but his voice was hopeful, like he was wishing I'd tell him he was wrong. Like he wanted to be comforted. Reassured. "No, I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm releasing myself. From obligation. From loyalties that only ran in one direction. From the weight of guilt I've carried so long. I'd forgotten how it feels to be light. I never thought it would come to this, he whispered. I know. His voice cracked. We're still your family. No, Nate, I said quietly. I was your family. You haven't been mine in a very long time. And that was the end of it. No raised voices. No resolution. Just truth, spoken softly enough to echo for years. I hung up, walked to the window, watched the street lamp flicker on in the dusk. The next day, I mailed a small package to Emery. Inside, the silver earrings wrapped in cloth, a copy of the trust, and a handwritten note. These are yours. Not because you asked, but because you showed up. Wear them when you feel uncertain. You were never invisible in this house. Not then. Not now. Not ever. She called 3 days later, crying and laughing at the same time. Grandma, she said, voice shaking. I don't even know what to say. You already did, I replied. The day you asked if you could come visit. The day you came without needing a reason. That night, I lit the fire again and sat beside it in its warmth. Outside, the street was quiet, dusted with the season's first snow, soft flakes falling under the orange glow of the street lamp, slow and clean. I watched it fall through the glass and thought of all the Thanksgivings that came before. The ones I cooked through pain. The ones I sat through in silence. The ones I was invited to at the last moment like an afterthought. And then I thought of this one. The one I gave to myself. No carving knives. No second helpings. No table set for approval. Just a walk. A diner. A slice of pie. And the clearest thing I've ever tasted. Not bitterness. Freedom. And if you're still reading this, if you've ever waited for someone who forgot to wait for you, listen. You can stop now. You can light a candle for yourself. You can buy your own pie. You can begin again. Right here. Right now. Your silence is not emptiness. It's value. Your seat is yours. And you don't need permission to keep it. Sweetheart, don't forget to subscribe and leave me a little note in the comments. I love hearing from you.